Hi, welcome to the first post-summit 2020 working session. So today we actually have Seba, which is actually one of the founders of the new season, right, of Open Security Summits, right? And he's been very heavily involved in threat modeling, so this should be a really great session. What we're going to try to do now, between now and June next year, where we're going to have our next Open Security Summit on site, also probably with a good remote participation, is to do monthly Open Security Summit working sessions. So this is the beginning of that kind of pattern. So we'll do it. There's about 4 this week, and then we want to do a lot more the following month. So probably the second week of the month, we'll do a bunch of sessions. So if you have ideas on sessions that you would like to do or sessions you would like to see, please drop the information in the channels, and we'll try to make it happen. And over to you, Seba, for your threat modeling playbooks presentation.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Dennis. So before I actually start with the presentation, so I'll let me explain a little bit why we did this and why we started the threat modeling playbook. So I assume that most of you already know threat modeling a little bit. I'll do a small introduction, but it's a foundational aspect or activity of doing or creating software, secure software or secure products. And you most probably have already been involved in like doing a threat modeling session and so on, and that all works fine. But what we see and what you've probably also experienced, it as a practice, threat modeling is quite hard to organize in a, I would say, repeatable and predictable way, and or even a scalable way in organizations. And that's why we've actually come up with this playbook, which is a tactical way to start up threat modeling as a practice. So what we've done is so with Torian, we have a lot of experience in doing threat models, in doing training around threat models. And what we've done is we've used that experience and we've put that into the playbook for anyone who would become responsible, who wants to introduce threat modeling as a practice in an organization. And what I would really want you to do, or to get out of this session, is to have a look at that, download it, use it, and try it out yourselves. Because what we've done is we've released this playbook in open source as Torian, because, well, we firmly believe in open source. We've, like Dennis said, I'm one of the guys who started the summit as well. I'm also quite involved in OWASP, so we've donated to OWASP as a project, and we hope to get feedback and to iterate the playbook into a even better version for everyone to use and to apply. So with that, I'll share my screen. Let me check if I have my presentation ready. I do have a presentation, and I can spend a lot of time to, I would say, do the presentation itself, but I would really like to have a discussion with you on that as well. So if everything is well, you should be seeing my slides. If not, please shout. I'm not hearing any shouting, so I assume that this is visible. So it's about threat modeling playbook. I explained already a little bit how the setup is. So I'll explain a little bit about threat modeling. I'll explain why I've created a playbook, and then the playbook is organized around a couple of elements which are listed here, and these are the topics I'm going to cover. You can already download or see the threat modeling playbook in GitHub. The link is here, so if you can't wait, go there. We also have a landing page on our website if you want to have like a full PDF version or want to find out what we do around that. But the main topic, the main content is published on GitHub. I'll be showing or demonstrating that, and obviously we'll definitely take time to cover any questions throughout this, the presentation right now or at the end. I believe that I have like an hour and a half, so I should definitely be able to do that. So I'll dive into this threat modeling very quickly. It's really activity of understanding and managing software or application risks. It's not only about identifying what can go wrong, but also to decide together with the team, okay, what are we going to do about that? Now, as an activity, threat modeling really is best done as part of a design activity when you create or deploy new software. So what I have here is an overview of typical stages during a development lifecycle. So you design some new functionality or completely new application. Code will get pulled together or built. Hopefully this all gets tested, and most of our software is running in operational environments wherever. And typically these are iterations. And you see in yellow, green, the typical security activities that you have during each of these stages to tackle operational aspects, coding bugs, having like parameters not being set right, SSL, TLS issues, and so on. Obviously, these all can be tackled with security activities like testing, source code reviews, application firewalls. But what we're tackling and what we want to tackle with threat modeling is design flaws, and that's what what I'm talking about here. And threat modeling, how in whatever way you typically do this, is covered by typically a 4-question framework. It's understanding what you're building, typically done through diagramming the application or looking at existing diagrams. Identifying what can go wrong. You can do stride, but you can do a lot of other threat checklists. Obviously, you want to find out not only what can go wrong, but what are we doing about this? What are we going to do about this? And you want to learn from this and iterate through your threat modeling as you go. So those are typically the stages, also an iterative way of doing threat modeling. So why are we doing this? And I assume if you've already done threat modeling that you understand some of these benefits. It's one of the biggest, I would say, advantages of doing threat modeling is to get a team on the same page on the security of a new release or a new product, and to get a shared vision. Doing threat modeling also increases awareness. You should be able to identify the greatest risks and to address those and to figure out what to spend your resources on, so that you can justify on what items you're going to spend your time, energy, and dollars. And threat modeling done right should be able or should make it possible for you to get the biggest bang out of your buck in terms of like, okay, I do have a limited budget. What should I be spending it on in terms of securing my application? Also, whenever compliance requirements come into the picture, and nowadays that happens a lot, threat modeling will also be a very interesting and good activity to support any due diligence that you've done. It's like if you need to be GDPR compliant, and whenever you're processing personal data, you probably have to become or should be GDPR compliant. Doing privacy threat modeling will help you there, and so that's also a big benefit. So seeing all these benefits, why aren't we all doing this? Well, like I said, there's definitely some constraints here. So there's a requirement for having security experts involved. It can take quite some time. It's also quite hard to internalize and reproduce. Also, tooling is certainly at this stage, while evolving, is still limited. And overall, the activity in a lot of organizations does not really scale. And those are the issues that we see, and that we see also with doing this and organizing this for organizations that are really blocking threat modeling from becoming more mainstream and more scalable. So when we thought about this and when we looked at this, we really were thinking, okay, how can we improve this? And and when I say we, it's together with a whole couple of people within Torion who are involved in threat modeling. We start pulling together a little different aspects from different sources. So obviously we have a lot of experience ourselves in doing this, but I'm personally, for instance, also involved in some software assurance maturity model, which is a maturity model in implementing security or implementing an SDL, but it also involves threat modeling. There's obviously a threat modeling community at OWASP, and a lot of great ideas there. And one of the guys who works with our team, Steven Burks, is is one of the project leaders there. And what we've seen, or what I've seen, especially also with other projects like the Security Champions Playbook, which was an open source project, that works really well. It provides like with a very basic tactical plan or approach on how to do this. So we started putting this together, and we said, okay, let's try to put this together in what we call like a threat modeling playbook. And why a playbook? And we could have called it differently, because a playbook is typically something which is tactical, which you can give to someone, combining something you've experienced before in terms, and it combines a vision and a strategy into something you can do. And also, when you relate this, for instance, to American football, it's interesting to see how a playbook can be very interesting to do this. And Nick, who is also actually on this call, pitched that idea also earlier in using American football as a metaphor for becoming better at security. But it depends on the position in the field where you are. It depends on the strengths and the weaknesses of your opposition, which relates really well when you think about threat modeling. And also at the stage of the game where you're in, that you say, okay, now we need to take this approach. Now we do need to have these players on the field, take these positions, and so on. So it's definitely a game plan, and it helps people to understand what they can be doing or should be doing whenever they're involved in a game. And threat modeling is also a game, and a game that we want to win. And game winning is not covering everything, but it's to understand what your attacker potentially will do, and to understand what you should be doing in terms of defense. And overall, also what I've seen in other environments in terms of software security or security in general, that gamification always works to get people on board, to have convince developers to take part in, for instance, a threat modeling game of cards, for instance. So those are all ideas that we thought, okay, let's put this together and let's create a threat modeling playbook. And that's what we've done. And you see here on screen the overall picture of the threat modeling playbook, where we've split it up in, I would say, 5 big stages. It's not that there, I would say, in these stages that you actually have to do this in these order, but these are, I would say, the logical order. Obviously, you first have to get stakeholder buy-in. Then you should also make sure that threat modeling is embedded in the way you handle risks in your organization. And then we've focused threat modeling playbook around a very classical people, processes, technology approach, which makes sense because you have to first involve and train people to do threat modeling. Then you have to strengthen your processes, and then you can, and only then can you start innovating with technology. So in each of these stages, there are specific steps that we've described as for people on how to do this. And that's actually the rest of the presentation. And also when you, so let me switch, for instance, to the GitHub repository. When you go to the repository, you see the same kind of text here that we have in the document itself. But in each of these, for instance, stages to get stakeholder buy-in, what we've done is we've split up the steps and the activities. They're always like, do something to have this as a result. For instance, involve people, make sure they allocate time, inject expertise in either doing it yourself, hiring an expert, or doing training. Have some way to measure what your return on investment is, and so on. And so for each of these stages, this is explained in text, and hopefully in the next iteration, we can even add to that and add more references and add more details. But that's also here what I'm going to explain. So in the presentation as such. So it's about the first stage when you do threat modeling, or when you need to start up threat modeling, you need to make sure that identify who's going to be involved in your organization. Not only like developers, but also management, architects, project managers. Make sure that you identify those, that you explain to them what threat modeling is about, and that they commit on some kind of time that they can or they should be putting into this activity. Obviously, they will want some return on their time, and you have to explain what the potential gains are for them. So that's the first step. Like I said, and like I showed very shortly in the text already, it's you at this stage also have to select your approach. You can do this yourself depending on the culture and your, I would say, your personal knowledge, depending on where you are as an organization. Some organizations really want to do everything themselves, or you can, I would say, become quicker, hire an external expert to help them, to help you do this, and this can be external to your team, like within so other parts of the organization, or even external to your organization. And also think about threat modeling training, either internally or externally, to make sure that you have this injection of expertise. You need to inject some expertise in your organization. And obviously, at this stage, towards your stakeholders, you need to demonstrate that threat modeling works, and threat modeling so that you're not just doing this for fun, but there's clear and actionable outcomes. It's really important that you start tracking everything in terms of threat modeling in bug fixes, in Jira tickets, in incidents. Dennis is involved here. I know he's a big fan of tracking everything in Jira. So threat modeling as an activity, we should make sure there's a link towards tools that the developers and the teams are using, but they also track the outcome of any of the threat modeling findings. And in the beginning, you should have findings coming up and raising quite rapidly. But in the end, deployment issues, like stuff that you don't want to have, should start going down. They should start measuring both these metrics and see how, by implementing threat modeling, these metrics react. So that's the first stage. Second stage is make sure that you embed this in your organization, and this is about technical risk management. Typically, you'd want to have like some kind of risk management process in your organization. So if this is completely new to you, I recommend to have a look at an ISO standard that's quite useful for this. There's a picture here that describes how this works. But it's really about making sure that you perform assessment and to treat the risks that I would say arise, but also that you communicate around this and that you monitor and review what you're doing in your organization. So if you have a good working risk management process in your organization, make sure to piggyback threat modeling into this so that there is a real link to that. If not, well, I would say take a step back and make sure that you have this kind of aspects in there. And what we've done is we've in the next 3 stages where we have people, process, technology, what's the PPT framework. What we've done is each of the activities we've managed or we've mapped on the ISO 27005 standard. So where you can see, okay, these activities, it really belongs in terms of context establishment or monitoring and review or assessment and treatment and so on. So we've simplified the ISO standard, that's for sure. But what we've done is we've mapped threat modeling playbook activities on there. So whenever you involve people that are familiar with risk management, that they understand how this fits together. So that's the overall approach. First, make sure you involve stakeholders, that you convince them to do this, embed this in your organization. Then we go to the people, process, technology part. And the first thing is, obviously, people should understand what threat modeling is about. So it starts again with a little bit of like identify stakeholders, make sure that you for each of the teams or projects that you know which kind of roles typically would be involved and how they should be involved and what potentially their motivation would be to do threat modeling. Because threat modeling is a team activity. It's not something you do on your own. You have to do this together with the rest of the team. Once you know what those people are, what those roles are, also consider, depending on where you are in this process, to create or start or improve a threat modeling specialist role. And so I have not seen one yet, and so we've created one ourselves, and we've put it together here in this threat modeling playbook. So I'm really, I would say, interested in feedback on this one. But what we've put together is the typical responsibilities, tasks, and required skills and experience of a threat modeling specialist. Because what you'll want is for threat modeling to become, I would say, a practice in an organization, is you need to have someone who facilitates this and that supports this in your squads or teams. And typically this kind of role will float as a specialist throughout the organization to support the different squads. And I'm coining squads here if your organization would be aligned on squads in a Spotify model. Otherwise, you just have to replace squads with a development team or a deployment team. But step one would be carve out this role, and step two would be hire internal or external candidate specialists for this, so that you know, or that this kind of role is taken up. Obviously, once you have those two done, you want to make sure that threat modeling is understood by people who you involved, and you typically differentiate by people that will be involved in a couple of workshops, like for instance diagramming workshop or threat modeling, like a threat identification workshop. People who would be involved in those workshops, they need to have a basic understanding. Threat modeling specialists or security architects or security, I would say, specialists that would or that should be involved in threat modeling in a more structural way, you would have more like role-based training for them. I've involved, or we've put up a minimal training curriculum just to make sure that this threat modeling training covers at least this. Make sure that it involves hands-on learning and doing this yourself. And typically you would want to map this to your own organization in terms of technology, in terms of project governance. That's how you'd want to train the people involved. So that's the people side, and it's the first step and the most important step. And then you should be linking your threat modeling activities in your own processes. And so understand how your current process works. Typically, you will not be starting from scratch. So if you don't have any, I would say, structural SDL, have a look at owasp SAM. But what are you doing? When are you actually already doing threat modeling? What are typical input, outputs? What are the steps you take? And you can also maybe draw that overview and map it on the playbook that we've proposed here, and see where are your gaps, where are your white spaces that you're not doing, and to fill in or to actually start that activity. A second step is that threat modeling is still an activity that takes quite some time, and you should order or apply this as a practice on applications that are high risk first. So introduce application risk levels if you don't have that yet. So typically, if you have a portfolio of 10, 100, or 1,000 applications, where do you start? So typically you have buckets of like high, medium, low risk applications. Start having those kind of bucket criteria and apply threat modeling first to your high risk applications. So this is taking a step back a little bit and to see where would you start doing threat modeling. Then once you have this, look at what kind of methodology fits your organization. And we've added a couple of pointers to, I would say, interesting research to what kind of like criteria should a methodology fit. So it should be traceable, systematic, and so on, scalable. And there's a couple of them. And there, what you should be looking for is, okay, looking at the kind of information or looking at the kind of organization we are, what kind of methodology would be a good fit for us, and see what works and even adapt the methodology towards your own needs. That's the, I would say, a very important step here. You should really look for something that fits your way of working. Then there should be technical risk popping out of your threat modeling activity at a certain point in time. That will happen. But what's important here is that you align technical risk ratings of the different products, the different teams with each other. So typically you will align on a risk table like you have here. That's an example that you typically would use in your own organization, covering risk levels, implications, and also what you, if you have a risk process in place, if you have a risk register in place, piggyback on that. If not, again, go to the ISO framework, which will help you there. But what's important here is that you need to, I would say, normalize the kind of risk ratings you have on a table or risk levels that you can compare throughout your organization, or at least within the same business unit or with comparable threat models throughout the organization. That will help immensely to start comparing threat model outcomes and to see how you treat them. Definitely something to consider also is make sure that whenever you have applied threat modeling and you have identified those technical risks and that you have agreed upon, okay, we are going to tackle problem 1 and 2 and not 3 and 4, make sure you agree on the mitigations and the follow-up actions and accountable persons for that. So that is a step in the methodology and also a step in the Treadmill playbook, which we've identified as being really important here. To close the loop, to make sure that whatever you've done also gets actionable and that there's a feedback loop even towards the threat modeling methodology. And that brings me to the next step in this process, I would say stage, which is the biggest one, but we believe is the most important one, is that first of all, reuse artifacts that your teams already have. Then hook into other security activities and make sure that you drive, for instance, pen testing or audit findings, and that you have interactions with your threat modeling. And then, like I said, align and standardize risk calculations across teams so that you can start comparing those. And that was a process view. And only then should you really be looking at tools. Right? So don't start with the tool first approach, start with a people first approach, and then process and then technology. So start with tools, and the most important tool is the one between your two ears, and then the flip charts or whiteboards. Even the back of a napkin would be good. Obviously, in COVID times, remote collaboration tools were quite helpful as well. And then only then could you be looking at threat modeling tools like open source tools or even commercial tools that help threat modeling. And definitely there's a couple out there that are good and that are scalable. We've seen that. But make sure that when you start comparing tools, and there's a tool outcome and a tool criteria list in the playbook here, that you make sure that there is a way to create and collaborate models, that you have a good way of persisting the threat models in a way that you can reuse them in other setups. Obviously, it needs to support a risk-based approach. It also should cover a way of documenting what you found, that there's also links maybe to Jira or to other systems and so on. As this is a tool, or this would be a tool that can contain quite sensitive information, typically it should have like proper access control and operational needs and cover operational needs and so on. But have a look at those kind of potential tools, and then make sure to integrate the tooling in your methodology, in your pipeline, if possible, so that you can reuse tools from the team, reuse diagrams, integrate with knowledge repositories, track actions through ticketing and so on. And you could go as far, and that's, I would say, a really interesting evolution that I've seen in the last couple of years, that you tie threat modeling as close as possible to the code and to consider threat modeling as code. So it means that dev teams can annotate their code or their artifacts with threat modeling or threat, I would say, tags, and then that you generate or that you keep your threat modeling, that threat model that comes out of that in sync with the original code or artifacts. So those are, I would say, in a helicopter view, very fast, the different steps that typically that we consider important as part of a playbook. What we've done is we've we've created this. We took and we've invested quite some time and energy into this. And what we've done is, okay, to make a bigger impact or to have an impact beyond our customers, what we decided was to open source this. And so we've donated it to OWASP. It's actually already accepted as an OWASP project. There is our first, I would say, project page is up and running. I just have to get, I would say, the first pull request accepted by Harold. It means that this is completely free to use. Anyone can use this. And what we really would like to have is that you download this and use this yourself. So in terms of, I've already quite shortly, I would say, explained where it is. Right? So you can look at this. I've already had people suggesting changes. We've already had some pull requests that were accepted in terms of fixes and so on. We're probably going to move this towards a SAM towards an OWASP repository. And the idea here is that have a look at it, apply this, see what works, and there's definitely also topics that can be improved. But the call for action here is to collaborate on a next version, which brings me to Q&A for this session. I've heard some pings. Maybe these are questions. So, any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a question. I just want to ask about the tools. I mean, I could not find. Well, I did some research, so I mean, I can't find that tool, like, you know, which is the one I say perfect, but like which covers almost everything, like that tools which really scale. Because I don't know, I couldn't find that one which really scales like all the time, you know, in any scenario. So what is your advice on that?
It's well, there are a couple of tools out there which should help you scale. So I'm just for the record, we don't have any. So Vitorion, we don't have any agreement with tools or vendors. So we are independent consulting company. I personally have good contact, so I would say fair explanation and there. So I'm biased towards Iris Risk because I know Steven de Vries and we've been involved in implementing that in larger setups. But I know that Treadmill also should work, and there's a couple of other tools as well. Now those are commercial tools. There's free and open source tools as well. Obviously, I would say they are less complete in a way as a typical commercial tool would be, but there's definitely quite some useful tools out there. It's one of our first steps in the next stage of I would say the playbook is to have a list of tools, at least for people to have a look at them and to consider applying that or using those in their organization. But that's not new. There's already existing lists of threat modeling playbooks or threat modeling playbooks, threat modeling tools out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So Seba, I have a question for you on the playbook. At the moment,
Yes.
So what you described there is at the moment is mainly markdown pages. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I think any thoughts you have on putting that into a sort of more machine consumable kind of way, like JSON or something else?
Yeah, we actually. So I've when I provided the document towards OWASP, I've added a small, I would say, roadmap to it. And one of the items on there is to at least convert it to like a format like YAML or JSON, so that indeed tools can use that to extract it and to reuse that in a way that is, I would say, a little bit more, I would say, machine friendly than Markdown.
Yeah, I think what would be good is to almost have a way where the original content is in JSON and then the Markdown is almost created from it.
Yeah. I totally agree, and for instance, we've done that with OWASP SAM as well. where it's completely generated from YAML in which JSON or YAML doesn't really matter, the underlying format there, but at least a machine readable and I would say a format that is predictable in structure. So that is,
I think that's
that would be
that's
definitely on the roadmap there, yeah. But that's more on the formatting part. In terms of content, I would really be interested to have, I would say, to have a first big engine, I would say, iteration of that one as well.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that's interesting is to integrate this with, you know, the threat modeling cookbook project that I think also exists, and trying to get those sort of templates, right? Because that will help a lot. Because I think the playbook, again, this one is generic, right? You almost want one specific for forks of this or variations of this that are specific for specific scenarios, right?
Yeah, no, indeed, you could, I would say, have more technology-specific implementations or type of organization-specific implementations. Like, so I'm working on AWS. I have this kind of DevOps pipeline. How would the playbook work for me, and adapt it towards that?
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's, but I would say the playbook itself, and that's a bit of background of some. It's generic, but we've tried to make it actionable to at least have like the basic steps. But yeah, in terms of like how to apply this on different contexts, different technology stacks, that would definitely be a extra layer of detail we could add here. And then you'd definitely want to have a JSON or another format underlying that to tie it together.
Yeah. Actually, have you mapped this to OpenSAM, to the SAM project?
Yep. There's so in owasp SAM, we already have the threat modeling as an activity in the security practice, and there what we've looked at is to at least cover the 3 maturity layers in owasp SAM. And these are reflected back in the playbook.
Yeah, so the logic. So have you done that mapping where I know that if my team has, is on that,
it's not a one-on-one mapping, but if we'd like, let me have a look here at, and I'll share my screen as well. So if you go to the SAM model and we go to threat assessment and we go to, well, for instance, application risk profile would fit like one-on-one with here, like introduce application risk levels. So whereas if you go to threat modeling, best effort, make sure that you have at least like some persistence of materials and so on. So here, this, and that was already on purpose, there's already a people process technology structure in there. So this is the people part, this is the process part, and this is the tooling part. Only that at level 1, it's very basic. And whereas if you want to go towards a level 2, it will be more specific. And here there's, for instance, standardize or select a threat modeling methodology that would fit on this one. Choose a threat modeling methodology. So you could, I would say, for each of these steps, link them to, I would say, at least the threat assessment levels and threat modeling, or the threat modeling activity of threat assessment, and see, okay, this is a level 1 activity or level 2 activity or level 3 activity, or at least it would fit those. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, in a way that is really what gives you scale of this, right? Because if you think about it, like, my thing with SAM is always that I always felt was a bit disconnected from the real world, right? So what you really want is a case where, Glasswall, we have now teams, Petra and Abbas, that's the reason why Abbas was asking that question, right, of scalability, because, that's the challenge that we have, right? So the good news on this is that, once we get the teams to do the threat models, and I view that maturity almost needs to be tracked per team, right? So we have multiple teams. Each team will have a different maturity, right? Each project even, right? But you almost want a case to know each of these will now move the needle on SAM, because SAM gives you also the great health dashboard that covers a lot of other things.
Yep.
I mean, so I think it's quite interesting to say, and this is where you have to be binary, right? You said once you do this activity, you move the needle there, right?
Yep.
You know, it's kind of like it has to be binary on that one. It's a graph, man. You know, it'll end up being a graph, right?
Yeah, we don't have a playbook graph yet, but yeah, I'm pretty sure you can create one.
That's what I should create, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Indeed. Indeed.
Cool.
So yeah.
Any other
Great
questions?
suggestion.
Or suggestions for this?
Nick, I know you're in there as well.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good. I think, first of all, that was well put together. It's definitely, I have no immediate suggestions, is my answer. Is it needs, what you've done is you've taken it to the level that it requires detailed analysis now. Like the ideas there, which is the most difficult part. In the fact, you know, I mean, as per what we just heard, and is spinning ideas off this, is that it's certainly something to spin ideas off of. But
Yep.
I've got, yeah, and just well put together and worth. It feels like something that reward effort, whereas before with this sort of thing, you're never sure. And especially thank you for the shout out, and nice to know those sort of presentations got you thinking. And then
Definitely.
yeah, I mean and now it's at the stage where you need to look at it in detail, and each person needs to apply it to their own environment much more. In that this is not something threat modeling is something we all know generally, and it's all quite theoretical. This turns it into a practice. And it becomes something that you just do rather than something you know you should do, but it's difficult to get started. What you've done here, I think, is help people get started.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's definitely the goal. Yeah. And also, it's based on American football, not on the golf play.
Well, it's really nice. It's the emphasis on teamwork, isn't it? And also,
Yeah,
I mean, the thing with threat modeling is it's not about you, it's about your threats, which is the part everybody misses, is that we'll all aim towards this mythological ideal state of security, which is fine if we all had infinite resources and infinite time and infinite staff. And our industry has finally learned we don't have that. So as you said, where do you put your limited resources? You think about your attacker and then you decide from there. Is where this, I mean, this is certainly a sign of a progression in thinking that wasn't there before.
All right, thank you. All right, anyone else?
Actually, that point, Nick, you just mentioned about thinking about the attacker. We actually had a very cool thread even a couple of days ago on it, and my view on it is that you're absolutely spot on, right? Like, I think if you don't apply the threat agents and the attackers that you're going to hit, right, you lose a lot of sense of reality, right? You know, it's very important to understand who can do, you know, the kind of threats that you have, right? And also, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that you can just say, I'll accept that because my current threat landscape, you know, doesn't have those kind of attackers, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we as an industry, I mean, movie level threats are really interesting and exciting to talk about, but they don't make us safer. So if you make it, if you make your defenses much more realistic and use your limited resources accordingly, it's, I mean, I'll see if saying this puts the right point across, but this actually helps make threat modeling a little less interesting, but in a good way. In that, and it's nice. I think I can see Seba smiling, which is good. As in you've taken that the right way. In that it means you can think about it more, be more practical rather than what threat do I need to protect against? Well, it depends what I heard on the drive on the way in on the morning news. It's much more, well, who's actually against me? What does my estate look like? All those kind of considerations.
Yep. No, well put.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
All right. Anyone else? Any more questions, opinions?
I can ask another question.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Thank you. So just regarding like, okay, we work, let's say I work for a fire security company. So this like threat modeling, all of this is just becoming part of our software development cycle. But if you want to, I asked you about tooling for one purpose. I mean, that we are a like fire security company. We work a lot in cybersecurity. So we'll invest, we have to invest in security, and one of them is threat modeling. But if you want to talk about a normal web development company, let's say a small one, threat modeling can be like a big overhead. If you want to go and buy something like Iris Risk, like you mentioned, it is quite expensive. So I mean, and on the open source tools, I could not find that tool which is like, I know you can't find something which does it all, but I mean, without spending significant.
Yeah, that's true. But the advantage of having, I would say, smaller organizations is that you have the less of a scalability, I would say, challenge. You're probably much more focused on one or a couple of products, and having just one person or maybe two persons understanding the process and applying it in a way that it makes sense will I would say bring you much further than having a full-on product available. So while a full tool would be helpful in bigger organizations where you need scalability and where your central resources should be put more on building good templates and building good risk models for the toolings to support the different teams. You don't have that big scale challenge in smaller organizations. At least that's what I see.
Yeah, I also wanted to say I like the idea of having one person being like a threat model specialist. Just wondered if you, I'm sorry if I missed it, if you mentioned before, where do you see the security champions in this, like in this process, possibly?
They would be involved as part of the development teams. Typically, there would be your contact within the development teams, and they would be involved as an actor. Not quite sure if we've identified. If not, well, that would be definitely a contact to introduce or to add. Stakeholders, security, and so we had as roles security and or DevOps engineers, so they would map on those.
Yeah, I think security champions are key players on this, right? So once you have security champions, they should be the ones that at least are accountable for making sure the threat modeling is happening, right?
Yeah,
I agree.
And they should be the maintainers in a way of the threat model. So, and I think the kind of the tool that also Abbas is mentioning, I think we haven't found is sort of that tool that allows to put threat modeling as the center of the documentation process. Because what I found is that if you don't, I really like the idea of the threat modeling as a source of truth for the organization, right? Where the developers might even maintain documentation in the beginning, right? But eventually documentation and diagrams will be invariably out of date, right? And I think, while the developer teams can get away with that for all sorts of reasons, including sometimes they don't get pressure, right, to do it. I think on threat modeling, there could be a mandate to say, you need to make sure your threat modeling is kept up to date with the latest design changes, right? And I think if we can then align threat modeling with security architecture diagrams, then threat modeling adds crazy value all the time, not just, in a particular moment in time during design or whatever, right?
Yeah, indeed. But yeah, we have yet to have that kind of tool that supports the whole cycle there. Yeah.
There you go, Petra. You know what project and Abbas we need to put some energy on.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track.
Yeah. Only problem when you have like that big, say you have a design and suddenly the whole design change and you need to adapt like your threat model. That's scaling. That's the hardest bit I ever found. So to be honest.
Yeah.
But that's the problem everybody has, right?
Yeah.
The reason why, the party trick when you're doing threat modeling is ask for documentation, right? Because you know that 99.9% of the cases, per se, not 85% of the cases they won't have this in documentation, and 99.9 they won't have up-to-date documentation, right?
Yeah, and I would even argue that what Abbas brings up is the real challenge here, because aligning on documentation will make threat modeling even it's problematic, because if the documentation is updated, that means that a lot of other things have already changed up front. But making a design change for a particular module or part of the software, and not at least having thinking, okay, what's my impact on my threat model? That's the biggest challenge there. That's the biggest risk overall for your development process. So having like a hook into the brain of the architect that makes that design choice, that's what we need. Obviously, we're not going to tap into any brains soon, but at least like piggybacking, okay, what's going to happen then? What's the architect going to do? And that we can identify a hook in the process. Okay, this means we need to, at least someone has to have a look at the threat model.
Yeah. So in the past, one of the things I've done was I made a security champion take that responsibility. So what will happen is they had to basically confirm. So the point is, if you ask somebody, can you make sure that on every sprint you add points to do documentation and architecture diagram reviews and security impact assessments, very few would do it, right? But you can basically say that on every major change, you need to basically do, or at least update your threat model. And if you don't, you have to accept the risk that said, basically the risk says, you don't understand the security implications of what you're about to do, right? And that's a much tougher one, because that needs to be accepted by the product owner, right? And the business owner. So you give them a risk to say, click here, or acknowledge that we don't understand the security implications of this new feature, which basically means you're going to be accountable if this thing goes wrong. That has a lot more stick, right? And then threat model comes off it, right? So then threat model is a good scalable way to keep answering that question in an effective way. Like, what is the security implication of this design change?
Yeah, and that's definitely where the security champion can play a role, because those are, I would say, the eyes and ears of, I would say, then the threat modeling specialist in each team. And then I would say every new sprint, or whenever user stories are introduced, and at least having someone thinking about, will this affect the threat model, yes or no? And depending also on the level of the security champion, he or she could do it themselves, or at least like call out for the specialist, like, hey, look, we need to have a look at this.
Yeah, actually think about it. I think on your security threat modeling specialist, you should add an offshoot of that, which is the bits that the security champion can do, right? Because for it to scale,
create a pull
I agree. Yeah.
No, but definitely. No, but I've noted it down. I've added it as a potential improvement. We've even piggybacked on the whole application security champion part as an idea, but you brought it up here, and I see that specifically the application security champion role is not specifically called out in here as the person who needs to make sure that this gets traction in the team. So yeah.
Yeah, because I think that the model of having a central or a subject matter expert that is available right on demand, I think that's very important because for example, like I find that I have a bit of experience on thread modeling. If I'm given an initial thread model, I am 10 times more productive, right? I can really hit the ground running, and I can consume it, right? But you need it doesn't scale to get the expert or the experienced person to start the thread modeling from scratch.
No, definitely, and that's actually the way you can start to I would say to scale it up by having a security champion and a team prepare a threat model change, and then like just call upon like half an hour or an hour of a specialist time who divides their or her time between the different teams, and that's from my understanding, not directly but indirectly, for instance, also how, for instance, organizations like Microsoft are doing it. They have a couple of like central threat modeling specialists, and they on a daily basis, like they cover like 6 to 8 teams. They present what they're doing, and they say, okay, you should be looking at this or that, and like in half an hour to an hour, they've covered like a whole threat model, and that scales pretty well.
Yep. Well, and then he has the advantage that with every one of those interactions, the other team, they're learning, right? They can digest, but also, you're delegating knowledge because it means that the people on the ground get to actually try to do them themselves, right? So in a way, you scale really nicely when you almost don't have to be involved, right? So it's almost like those central resources, their job is to, in a way, not to be involved, right? It's to provide a lot of guidance, but ultimately the success story is when you have no further comments, right?
Yep, indeed.
That's the objective. Cool.
All right, great. Any other questions, remarks? Otherwise, I have a couple of like concluding slides I can share. Let me.
Is there anything on the chat? I haven't been paying attention. Has anybody posted anything on the chat?
No, there is nothing in the chat.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Good. So with that, I definitely, so I want to thank the people who are involved at Torion, but I also definitely want to extend this to other people. So make sure to already have a look at it. I will definitely update, I would say, people whenever we've moved this towards owasp. So if you want to get in touch, either professionally or through owasp, here are my contact details. If you want to understand more about threat modeling, we have a threat modeling insider newsletter, which we are like we have guest articles. And so if you have like a good idea or something you'd like to share, get in touch with me, and we'll put you in the next newsletter. And then obviously we also do trainings around this. So if you're interested, in November and in January, we organize our next trainings. So the list of the trainings are there. So with that, I thank you really, really hard for participating in the session, and I'm looking forward to your remarks and your feedback and your inputs.
Thank you, Sebastien.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
For your participation. And
Thank you,
then,
Sebastien.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Think we can end
All
the
right.
recording now?
Yep.